What's up everyone, it's Austin here from Make Pop Music and Austin Hall Audio, and we are back with another video. And for the video today, I wanted to cover 5 mistakes that beginners should avoid at all costs necessary. These are mistakes that I made a lot growing up as a producer. These are mistakes that I see peers make all the time. And these are mistakes that sometimes professionals like myself can even kind of slide back into. So I'm going to show you the 5 mistakes, I'm going to show you how to recognize them, and then I'm going to show you how to kind of counteract those and remedy those. So if you have any questions, let us know in the comments down below. If you want to see more videos like this, or if you have any recommendations, let us know about that in the comments down below. And then if you like this video, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support the channel, head over to our website, makepopmusic.com, after this video is over. But let's hop into Cubase so I can show you 5 of these mistakes that you should be avoiding. Alright, so we're in my DAW. I'm going to try to give you examples where I can, but most of these are just kind of fundamental principles, so this is not going to be like a super technique-driven video. But the first mistake that I see beginners making all the time when they send me instrumentals is that they just have way too much stuff going on. And typically if you're producing, unless you're in a genre like electronic music where kind of the production is what people are listening for, you want to leave space for a vocal, right? You want to leave space for a vocal melody and for a vocal to actually sit inside a mix. And most of the time when people are sending me things, I'm finding that they have added way too many elements way too quick. So I'm going to kind of show you through a demo where it would be in the process of kind of where I would start writing over it and kind of explaining what should be in there. So when I'm writing a demo that I know is going to get a vocal put over it, I'm typically looking to kind of flesh out the drums and percussion, so we kind of have our rhythm set. I'm typically looking to have the lead riff or lead melody or chord progression already in there, and then I'm looking to have something going on with some low end, so like a bass line, or are we kind of having these long sustained respaces? It doesn't really matter, I just mainly want to make sure that we've got our chord progression and kind of our main melody and harmony. I want to make sure that we've got our main rhythm with the percussion, and then I want to make sure that we've got some basic sound design. So here's kind of an idea, and this is where I would prefer to kind of have something before I start writing vocals to it. So I'll show you. It actually has a couple things that I'd probably take out before I start writing just because I've added flourishes, but take a listen to how simple and how basic this sounds. You can hear that there's no crazy synth stuff or guitar stuff or lead stuff happening. Really all that we've got so far, and this is kind of where I would cap it for a demo before you write on top of it, is this main guitar. And that's got a little bit of melody baked into the actual chord progression. Then I've just got that same thing an octave lower. So it's not adding anything to that arrangement, it's just kind of giving me some extra texture. And then I've got one pad to kind of cement those chord progressions in, so it's not just this little like arpeggiated melody from that guitar. And then we've got a pretty basic drum setup. I know it looks like there's a lot of loops, but they're kind of all doing the same thing. And really it's just a kick, snare, and this like little triplet kind of clicky, clappy pattern. So as a producer in my head, I want to keep adding stuff and keep adding stuff and keep adding stuff because I want this to sound as big and as interesting as possible. However, if I add much more than this, then I know that I'm going to pigeonhole myself or the writer that I'm sending this to, and they're just not going to have that much inspiration and that much room to actually do whatever they want to do. So when you're working on a production, especially for an artist or a production that you're going to come back on and write later, make sure that you're not adding too many things because you're going to end up having to scratch them just to make room for a vocal. So we don't have any lead synth elements, we don't have any crazy counter melodies, we don't have any crazy textures. We've got a couple of these little flourishes, but those can be taken out, and that is about it. Keep your demos as simple as possible while still making the song shine. The second thing that I see beginners doing all the time is kind of blindly following advice that they see on YouTube tutorials, and I know how ironic that sounds because I'm sitting here giving advice, but they follow it to a T, or they'll follow one of those infographics that they see on Instagram, or they'll hear somebody say something on a video or on a forum or something like that, and they start doing things in their process just because they feel like they need to do them. they don't actually know if they need to do them. So one example that I've kind of prepared for you guys is I have this kick. It's the same kick as this verse right here. So this is how I processed it to fit the track. And it's really simple. It's just I added a little bit of EQ to take away a little bit of low end so it's not super big in the verse. And then I kind of filtered it out to take away some top end and kind of drove it down even farther, kind of making it a bit darker. So here's what it sounds like with nothing. And then here's how I felt the need to process it. And in the mix, the way I processed it, I feel like just fits that vibe better. I'm not doing things just to do them, but let's take a look at another example. So we're gonna look at this kick. It's the same exact kick sample, but instead I have processed this how like a YouTube tutorial would have taught me. So I've kind of followed the same EQ moves. I've cut away some subs. I filtered that out. I've cut away some of the beater sound, as they said, at like 250, 200. And then I have basically added a preset on Virtual Mix Rack that's got all kinds of kick compressors and trimmers and EQs. And then I followed another tutorial that had a max bass idea. So I've just blindly followed 3 tutorials that in theory should give me the best kick sound that I could possibly imagine. And here's what it sounds like. So not even in the mix, it sounds way too compressed. It sounds way too bright for what we're doing right here. And it has this weird hollow like mid scoop. So let me show you what that sounds like in the mix. And this is actually a couple dBs louder than the original kick, but as you can hear, it just sounds hollow. It's got like this shimmery brightness that doesn't really work well. And I've added all of those things that in theory should have made this the best kick. However, if I go back to my verse kick that just has a couple EQ moves, it just fits the vibe way better. It's a little dark, it's kind of punchy, but it's not super like boomy punchy, and that fits. And then in the chorus, here's an example of how to know when to do nothing. So like I said, you shouldn't be adding things just to add them. You shouldn't watch this video and say, I need to EQ my kick drum like that. Here's a kick drum that I have not processed at all. It is that exact same sample. Actually, let's see. It's just a decap kick from Splice. So let's take a listen now. So this has nothing on it. And in the mix, and this is part of the reasons that we don't do so many mixing tutorials, especially on like drum mixing, is because it really depends on your element, it really depends on your song, and it really depends on the vibe that you're going for. You really just need to kind of have that vision in your mind of when to follow advice online as kind of like a starting point, and then when to kind of branch it off and do your own thing. So there's an example of not to just blindly follow advice because it made that kick drum sound awful in our mix. And that kind of rolls into theory number 3, which is a big thing that I see beginners doing, is not learning their tools as they purchase them or download them. I know we all see plugins come out. I know we all see new gear come out. We download it or purchase it, or some people illegally download it as fast as possible. And it is exciting, but I think that when you don't take the time to actually learn that tool and that plugin, that's where a lot of the disconnect comes with things like you see a tutorial and you blindly follow it. You start compressing things just because you think you should. You start EQing things just because you think you should. You add this new de-esser because you saw somebody on YouTube talk about it. And while I think it's great that we have so much knowledge out there, I think that you learning your tools when you download them is the biggest tip, honestly, out of this entire video. So when I download a new plugin, or when a company sends me something to beta test, or when I go on a Black Friday spree and I buy a million things, I will read through that manual. I'll watch a few YouTube tutorials where they kind of walk you through the whole plugin, and then I'll kind of spend 30 minutes to an hour in a session that's not even a real session, where I just kind of play around with it, learn what every single different knob does, learn where all of the kind of key features are, and then once I actually get to my mix, I know exactly what I'm looking for. So here's a good example. I'm using Kilohertz multipass on a hi-hat, and it's a preset that I use a lot. And at first when I got this, I was just using the presets and I didn't really know how to format those. And I quickly learned that this is just set up in like a multi-band function. All I had to do was read the manual and watch a couple videos, and then you can start to kind of tweak and customize sound. So even if you're starting with a preset in a plugin or a synth or, you know, something that you purchased, knowing how to then go in and kind of tweak that is huge. So let's hear what this sounds like. And if I don't know how exactly to go in and tweak that and change things like envelopes and LFOs and kind of dial back mix knobs in areas, I'm kind of stuck with whatever I get from that. But if you go in, what you can do is you can turn down mix settings, you can change your envelopes, you can add LFOs to other things. And, you know, that just really kind of makes everything a bit more customizable, and it makes it so when you are grabbing something, you're not grabbing it just to grab it, you're grabbing it because you feel like you need it, and you can kind of already hear it in your mind. So things are just a bit more smooth in that production process. It's much less guessing and much less kind of recognizing, okay, here's an issue, the kick doesn't have enough transient, so instead of grabbing a compressor, I'm gonna grab that new transient shaper, and I know that it has a 2x button that I don't wanna hit because I don't need it that kind of transient. So doing things like that, you know, like right here, it's like, we've kind of brought down some sustain. I don't have any attack happening. You just need to know how to use your plugins. You need to know how to use your tools and techniques, because otherwise you're just going to be blindly following advice, and it's just a lot of trial and error that is going to lead to something that ends up not even being that conducive to your actual production. The fourth mistake that I see beginners kind of falling into all the time is not really mixing as they go. So they kind of see production and mixing as two separate things, and I think that this has kind of happened with people starting to produce themselves and kind of remote working, is I think we have this kind of distorted vision of what mixing is now, because I think a lot of people think that they can hire somebody for a mix and they're going to go in and kind of do some sound design and do some filtering and kind of do all of these extra things that really do fall under production. Because if I were to print stems out for my project and send it to one of the biggest mixers in the world, they're not going to be really adding things. They're really just going to be leveling things, figuring out where to pan things, adding stereo effects. They're going to be figuring out how to best compress or EQ something and kind of fix something that I might have messed up on my end. They're not going to be sitting here listening to, okay, well, let me filter this out and then let me open that. Let me, you know, cut this area out right here so it feels a little bit more urgent. When you're not doing these things in the production and in the arrangement process, I think that people start to A, have way too much to do when they get into their own mix phase, or B, they expect way too much out of a mixer that they have hired, because that's not really the mixer's job. So let me show you a quick example for this. I'll show you this verse right here because I have kind of mixed these synths as I go, and it really does add to the vibe. So here's what it sounds like with some of the mixing that I've done. Now, if I go through and I just turn off all of my inserts and all of my EQs and everything like that, you'll quickly hear that this doesn't have the same vibe. It's the same arrangement, but we're not going to get nearly the amount of depth and detail that we do when I kind of mix this as I go. So really, to kind of break down what I'm doing in this mix section is I am mainly just doing some filtering, doing some stereo automation, doing some ducking, things like that, things that could be seen as a mix phase. However, doing them in the production, I kind of get full reign over that. So let me go ahead and turn off that EQ as well. And here's what it sounds like if I were to just play everything and just say, okay, I'm producing it and I'll mix it later. It just doesn't have the same kind of dynamic feel. It doesn't fill out that arrangement. It starts sounding muddy and it starts sounding cloudy. It's harder to kind of level all of my instruments and put them in their right pockets. And I think that as you add an element, if you can figure out how to make that one element kind of sit in, then once you get to the phase where you're trying to make everything sound as good as possible together, you don't have nearly as much material and content to kind of make fit. So, you know, it's things like you have to know when to sacrifice areas. So like on this guitar, we're filtering out most of it. You know, we're adding something like RC color to kind of give us a lot of different texture, but not doing those things makes the sound a little bit boring, and it just makes it not really fit. And when I do this while I'm producing, that helps me make the next decision a bit more informed and a bit more intentional, because I might listen to this while it's not being mixed and be like, okay, everything has plenty of lows and low mids. I don't really need anything. And then when it gets to the mix phase, maybe I don't like the lows and low mids of the pad and the guitar I have. But since I didn't really account for that because I wasn't filtering that out in the moment, I wasn't able to go in and add things that might be a better fit. And so as you start kind of mixing and kind of tweaking as you go, I think it becomes a lot more hands-on. And I think that when you do get to that mix stage, it's more so just wrapping up that last 5 and 10%. And this really, really helps when you're collaborating with artists or when you're being hired for a project. It really helps kind of have transparency along the entire process, rather than them getting to the end and being like, oh, I thought this was all going to come together in the mix, and it just still doesn't really feel right. So try to mix as you go and try to make informed decisions throughout the entire process, because it just makes for a much faster and speedier and smoother kind of production, writing, and mixing process. And then the last mistake that I see a lot of beginners making is they go along far too much to a reference. So I see this with production, I see this with mixing, I see this with writing, and it's that they will get a reference in and they'll start trying to copy those exact synths, they'll start trying to copy that vocal chain, they'll start trying to copy the structure. And I do think references are a good thing. I think that, you know, if you're mixing a song, then you need to make sure that if you were to slap that in a playlist on Spotify, it's going to kind of sonically fit in with what's going to come before and after it. However, there are a lot of decisions in every single song that I think need to be kind of custom tailored to this. So even though I made this song with a, you know, kind of reference and inspiration in mind, I'm going in and I'm adding my own things. Like I'm adding these little like kind of syncopated guitars right here that kind of sweep up. I'm adding things like extra little loops every section to kind of give me a little bit more beef. I'm adding things like these little kind of ear candy hits everywhere. And just because I've kind of followed the vibe of my reference doesn't mean that I need to go in and be like, okay, they're using this kind of synth and they've panned that to the right, so let me come in and let me do that. Because I just find that that's where a lot of inspiration starts lacking, and I find that that's where a lot of people kind of fall into the pitfall of having music that just sounds way too similar to a reference. So when you're working with a reference, I think have the vibe, I think have the idea, but I think of a reference more as like you're creating a playlist that you need to fit within, not you're creating a song to which you need to kind of mirror. So when you're working with references, yeah, maybe try to get 3 to 5 where you're like, if I were to finish this song, put this out in the world, and somebody made a playlist, here's 2 or 3 that come before it, here's 2 or 3 that come after it, and mine kind of slides in the middle. But I don't think that you need to be referencing every single thing and kind of going back and forth and being like, okay, they did this, so let me try that. They did this, so let me try that. Trust yourself, trust your mind, trust your own art and your own judgment, because I think that at the end of the day, that makes for a much more exciting process, and I think that you're going to get a little bit better results. So that's pretty much it. Those are the 5 things that I see beginners kind of doing all the time that they should avoid. But yeah, hopefully this helped. And there we have it. Those are the 5 mistakes that I think beginners should avoid. As you can see, they might seem pretty basic, but these are patterns that I see a lot of people sliding back into. So just try to recognize them, and then as you see them coming on, start to remedy them with some of the stuff we talked about in this video. If you like this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see more videos, let us know what you want to see down in the comments below. And if you want to support the channel, you can head over to our website, makepopmusic.com. But that's going to do it for the video this week. We will be back next week with much more content. But until then, everybody, much love, stay safe, peace.